Hi all, welcome and thank you so much for your time and interest. My name is Peter Littlefield. I'll be presenting today's migration to AWS webinar. Before I get too deep into actual migrations, methods, and tooling, I'd like to take a step back and address the why. As we've enabled thousands of migrations, we've noticed the emergence of commonalities in a number of areas which I'll cover, starting with common migration drivers. So why are customers choosing to migrate to AWS? Well, the conversations often begin with a desire for cost reduction, but there are many benefits that customers soon discover. These typically relate to mitigating challenges around hardware and software lifecycle management, time required to deploy hardware and resources for new business requirements. Our customers also value the ability to quickly scale, go global quite literally in minutes, leveraging our various regions and edge locations across the globe. In fact, across hundreds and thousands of customers, we see repeated patterns of economic payback to these migrations. For example, with our AWS variety of compute instances, our Nitro architecture approach to offloading network and storage work from the CPU often results in fewer cores being needed to host workloads and reduces licensing costs running on the cloud. The switch to a cloud-based security model often results in fewer security instances. Customers tell us that they expect 43% fewer monthly security incidents and 7 times reduction in downtime once they start operating on AWS. Also, the shift to both DevOps using modern tools and to serverless, where we automate more of the operations, means substantial productivity boosts. And on cost reduction, IDC studies have found that customers achieve 51% reductions in operational costs generally and 31% lower TCO over 5 years. And above the direct cost savings, especially for customers that have completed their first round of migrations, they see agility and staff productivity as a major benefit, as they're able to reduce the time and effort it takes to release enhancements and new capabilities for customers. And on average, 62% improvement in IT staff productivity. So that's a huge opportunity to reinvest those resources. And then just to give you a brief example, companies like Aon are saying that the time to innovation shortens. They're able to release more features. And in fact, the managing director of Aon Securities, Peter Phillips, said, and I quote, using AWS helps us reduce a 10-day process to 10 minutes. That's in the context of an analytics process they run across millions of policies using GPUs that AWS provides that they're able to get quickly and inexpensively. So now that we've done a whistle-stop tour of the why migrate, let me cover a few things which I'd like you to consider before you migrate. And so just a bit of context for migrations. What we typically see is that customers begin their journey with some sort of experimentation or new project. And so that could be like launching a microsite or taking advantage of some AWS cloud native features to provide your clients with a new service. Basically gives you a kind of small and safe environment in which to test the waters. That then leads us to foundational kind of activities. So there we typically see customers developing out their account structure, their tagging architecture, their approach to identity management, maybe even establishing a cloud center of excellence. And once that's been completed, or you kind of move through that and you kind of mature your capabilities, that's where we see migration and modernization take place. And so there it might be a case of deciding to migrate certain workloads. It might be some decisions around modernization to perhaps re-platform from Windows to Linux, maybe move away from mainframes, that sort of thing. And then that leads us to kind of continuous reinvention. That's where you're taking advantage of some of the high-level features in AWS and making use of some capabilities and flexibility that AWS offers to really transform your business and innovate for your clients. So I guess I'll end this slide by asking a question: where do you see yourself in this picture? I ask because the answer ultimately determines what steps lie ahead of you. But I think regardless of where you are in that journey, at some stage, you're going to need to look at your landscape in a bit more detail. And to that end, we've given a lot of thought to and analysis to migrations. And what we found, in terms of analyzing over 1,000 migrations, is that, again, a number of clear patterns emerge. So the one is that customers are realizing that some older apps may not even relate well to your future business model. So they might, warrant retiring those applications. And we see typically between 10 and 20% of application portfolios being retired. Secondly, software as a service. There are loads of vendors that never existed, thousands, maybe even the tens of thousands, who never existed 5 to 7 years ago. And so a number of on-premise apps that could be requiring a lot of effort to maintain, to keep running, could be replaced by software as a service offerings. A common example of that might be something like Salesforce, for example, as a CRM. That can really reduce the kind of operational load on IT operations. Obviously, you still need to take care of security and identity elements, but certainly lowers your kind of effort required. Then that's kind of moving on to where you take some decisions around lift and shifting, or replatforming, maybe changing databases to something that's less onerous from a licensing perspective. And then finally, you can choose to modernize. I think the key lesson and maybe the takeaway for you in terms of modernization is if you're gonna pick some applications to modernize, start with applications that are true differentiators to your business and to your customers first, because those are obviously going to be the ones that you can really kind of achieve those benefits and gains around agility and around being innovative to your customers. And then, we see transformation and modernization get applied to at least 20% of customers' application portfolios over time. Some in-house with IT and some outsourced to key partners. So when it comes to the actual migration, when we talk about lift and shift, replatforming, and moving workloads to AWS, there are still a number of stages to doing that, right? You want to make sure you've got a business case that supports the move. You might need to undertake some discovery exercises to understand just what constitutes a particular workload. Are there integrations to other applications that you may need to kind of work through and kind of discover and find out. But some lessons here is that where customers are successful is where customers create momentum early. They don't kind of get caught up in planning, inaction. I think we often call it analysis paralysis, right? So don't do that. Get going as soon as you can. And over the years, when we've engaged with our customers, we've updated our thinking into these kind of 3 primary phases, just to kind of structure our thoughts a bit. So in the assessment phase, that's where we want to do assessments and maybe do a bit of discovery to kind of understand what it is we're working with. And so we've done a lot of work to help our customers do that. In terms of the kind of middle phase of getting ready, that's where we look at things like landing zone, and preparing basically your kind of operating model in the cloud. And then what we've done there, again, to try and compress the time to success and support our customers, is to build things like Control Tower, which lets you set up a secure landing zone in days or even hours, where in the past it's not uncommon for that to take weeks or potentially even months. So once we get into that last phase, we've kind of covered assess, mobilize, and then migrate and modernize. That last phase of migrate and modernize, that's where we get to choose the most appropriate approach to our migration. We want to make sure that we group our applications appropriately, we use the right tools, we're able to visualize and track our migrations in a structured and methodical way. And this prompts the question, what tools might you use to do those sorts of things? So a bit of a busy slide. I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but we now have the broadest set of tools ever to simplify migrations and help you out. A couple of call-outs very quickly. One is that our 2019 acquisition of TSO Logic was launched as a customer-accessible website experience called Migration Evaluator. That lets you and your supporting partners initiate really fast kind of first directional business case exercises for moving apps from on-prem to AWS, and looks at cost savings across Windows Server, SQL Server. Another is that our application discovery service also released a network dependency model feature that captures and shows the network resources that make up an application. So you kind of don't miss anything when you're trying to make sure that you've covered everything relating to that application or workload. And then maybe just a moment to acknowledge that across all three of these phases, there are a lot of tools provided not only by ourselves at AWS, but supporting tools from our partners that you can often find just by kind of browsing through the AWS marketplace. And then lastly, when it comes to the actual migration, as you can see in that phase, we have a number of different services which I'll take you through. I'll give you an overview of AWS Data Sync, AWS Database Migration Service, and then I'll finish off with CloudEndure before we jump into the demo. So let's start with AWS Data Sync. Before we go near any servers, one of the focal points for any migration is, but what about our data? If it's not in the database on that particular server, there might be questions like, where is all my data? Is it in one data center? Is it in object stores? Is it in file shares? Is it sitting on NFS shares? Where are those shares? Are there different shares in offices and branches than in the main data centers? So what DataSync offers is a data transfer service that's able to copy data between NFS, SMB, self-managed object store, and a load of different AWS services. It supports AWS Snowcone, Amazon S3, Amazon EFS, our Elastic file system, as well as Amazon FSx for Windows file server. Furthermore, it integrates with a number of our management and monitoring services, so you can get detailed logs, you can audit your data transfer operations, you can schedule tasks, so it's not just a case of, you kind of set up a task to copy everything across and it ends. You can perform scheduled tasks. Your transfers are protected with TLS. It preserves object metadata if you're transferring between your own object store into S3, and it's multi-threaded to ensure, copies data across at real high speed. So when it comes to transferring objects, files, data, do consider DataSync as an option. It can really help you with that in a very cost-effective manner. I'm going to jump onto the database migration service quickly. So let me preface this by saying, our goal at AWS really is to allow you, the customer, the freedom to choose the best data platform for your needs. Hashtag database freedom. And so to support that goal, our AWS database migration service supports homogeneous migrations, such as Oracle to Oracle, heterogeneous migrations between different database platforms like Oracle and SQL to Aurora, Amazon Aurora. With AWS database migration service, you can continuously replicate that data with high availability and consolidate databases into petabyte scale data warehouses by streaming into Amazon Redshift and Amazon S3. How exactly does it all fit together? Let me take you through these two, basically the database migration service and then the supporting schema conversion tool. So basically, you can use the schema conversion tool to help copy or convert your data, as well as leverage DMS, database migration service, to move your data. So some salient points around each of these. Like I've said, migrations can be from on-premise databases to Amazon RDS or Amazon EC2. You could do it from databases running on Amazon EC2 to RDS or vice versa, as well as from one RDS database service to another RDS database. It can also move data between SQL, NoSQL, and text-based targets. It's a low-cost service. You only pay for the compute resources used during the migration process and any additional log storage. For example, migrating a terabyte-sized database can be done for as little as $3. This applies to both homogeneous and heterogeneous migrations of any supported databases. It's in a pretty stark contrast, I'm sure you'll agree, to some database migration methods, which can be super expensive. You can set up a DMS task for either one-time migration or an ongoing replication, which would then keep your source and target databases in sync. So once you set that up, the ongoing replication task continuously applies changes on the source, across to the target with minimal latency. And all DMS features such as data validation and transformations are available for any replication task. Then onto the schema conversion tool. That makes, it helps you with your heterogeneous database migrations, helps make them predictable. It automatically converts your source database schema and a majority of your database code objects, including your views, stored procedures, functions, to a format compatible with the target database. And anything that it can't automatically convert, they're marked super clearly. So you can then manually convert those outstanding elements to complete your migration. Schema conversion tool can also scan your application source code for embedded SQL statements and convert them as part of the database schema conversion project. And during that process, the schema conversion tool performs cloud native optimizations. Does that by converting legacy Oracle and SQL functions to their equivalent AWS service. So that really, lends a hand in terms of you taking the approach to modernize your applications at the same time as the database migration. And again, once that schema conversion is complete, the schema conversion tool can also help migrate data from a range of data warehouses to Amazon Redshift using built-in data migration agents. So that's DMS and SCT, as we call them. And then lastly is CloudEndure. So CloudEndure is the tool that really does a lot to simplify, accelerate, and automate migrations from physical, virtual, and cloud-based infrastructure to AWS. And in fact, you can also use it to migrate and replicate servers between AWS regions. It also has DR capability, so you can keep production in sync with DR. And as you'll see shortly, it really does just take minutes to get started, and it's super duper easy to use. So how does it work? It really is pretty straightforward. On the left in this diagram, we can see that you have your source environment. For the sake of this example, we're not converting from kind of SQL Server to RDS or Amazon Aurora. If we were to do that, we'd want to use the database migration service and the schema conversion tool. Instead, in this example, we have an Oracle database on a server, and we have a SQL server running, presumably on a Windows server. And those two, we just want to move as they are into AWS. So to go on-prem into AWS. And so in this example, we'd deploy the CloudEndure agent on the source machines. That wouldn't require any sort of reboot, and it wouldn't affect the performance in any noticeable way. So very low impact agent installation. That would then initiate a continuous data replication into AWS. And at that point, how CloudEndure does that is it provisions a low-cost staging area to keep costs of the migration down until you actually want to do a test or a final cutover, at which time you'd click a button. It's as simple as that. And CloudEndure would launch the machines into the appropriate target subnet that you've defined, or would deploy a new subnet for you. and that would be launched into actual servers that have now been migrated from the source environment. And so we'd have our Oracle database and SQL Server up and running in AWS after clicking that button. The CloudEndure's machine conversion technology ensures that those replicated machines can run natively within AWS, and the process typically takes just minutes for the machines to boot. So all of this results in CloudEndure being able to deliver rapid, reliable, self-service migrations that are super easy to kind of manage, orchestrate, and get going with minimal business disruption. So now I'll jump across to the demo.
Okay, let's get started. What I'm going to show you is a few things. Firstly, I'm going to show you very briefly the registration process. Then we'll log into the console. I'll show you how to create a project, set up a machine, get the replication going, and then perform a cutover. There's not much to the sign up. You just put in your credentials, and set a password. And I will wait for that email to arrive in my inbox. Cool. So once you get that confirmation email, there's just a link you need to click on to complete the registration, and you can sign in. If I use that email address to sign in, you'll see that we simply get kind of an open setup with nothing in there, and we get prompted to start configuring things. So you can see empty page and click this button to create a new project. I'm just going to switch to another account quickly where I've got a few things prepared. So let me log out of this. And we'll get started. You'll notice that I have two servers that are currently running. The one I'm already replicating, and I'll show you how to add the second one. So this server that's already replicating, we can see that the public IP ends in 124, but that these are the private IPs. This is a kind of a PHP lookup to see what the current IP is that matches what I've hard-coded in here. Same for server 2. So that'll be important in a little bit, but let me jump across to CloudEndure. So I mentioned the one server I'm already replicating. And so you can see that server here. This is the private IP ends in .95. So that corresponds with server 1. So that's currently being replicated. What you saw a little earlier when we did the sign up was that we were taken to a blank kind of project page. So I'll kind of simulate this by just creating a new project. And so you can see it wants a name. So I'll say new, let's just say test migration 2. Migration type, we can choose DR or migration. So let's just choose migration, and it auto fills in the rest of the stuff here. So there we'll click create project. And now it's telling us that we first need to set up the replication settings for the project. And how we do that is by creating a policy in our AWS management console and creating credentials for CloudEndure to use. So let's jump across to our management console in AWS. Here we want to go to identity and access management. You can also just search for it, identity, and we'll click on that. What we're going to do is create a policy. So policies, create policy. What you'll notice is that in the CloudEndure setup page, that tells us the project must have these permissions, and that's clickable. So if we click on that, we get given a JSON IAM policy. So what we can do is we can select that. Let's just Control A, copy, and then go into our management console, and we can just click on the JSON tab here. So if we click on JSON, let's kill that, and then paste that, and that's it. That's our policy. We just need to name it. CloudEndure policy dash new, and we'll go create policy. And then we're going to create a user, add user, and attach that policy to this user. So I'll say CloudEndure user new, and we're going to give it programmatic access. So that's where we get provided an access key and secret access key, which we can fill in on this page for CloudEndure. So let's go back to the console. We'll select programmatic access, permissions. Now, we don't need to click either of these. We're going to attach the policy that we created a moment ago. So let's do that. New, CloudEndure policy new. That's the one I created a moment ago. And we just go create user. What that then does is it gives us this access key ID. So I'll just copy that and paste it here. And then the secret access key, copy that, paste it here. And now that gives CloudEndure the permissions that it needs to create infrastructure resources on your behalf in AWS as a part of the kind of automation that it offers to help you with your migrations. The next step it's going to want our help with is to set a few migration settings. So here we can either choose to migrate from an AWS region to another AWS region, or we can choose, in my instance, I've got simulated on-prem infrastructure, which is these two servers here. So I'm going to say from migration source other infrastructure, migration target, I'll say Cape Town, where are you? There we go. Cool. So there are a few settings you can define in terms of replication settings. I'm going to leave them all as blank for now. You could choose to use a staging subnet that you create, but in this instance, CloudEndure is going to create everything for us. You can also choose to use a VPN or direct connect service. To do this privately, you can enable encryption, and you can also adjust your network bandwidth in terms of whether you need to apply throttling or not to minimize the impact, on your WAN or connectivity. So I'll leave that all as default for now. I'm going to hit save. And now it's saying we need to install the agents on our machines. So it's just a case of clicking the show me how, and we get all the instructions we need. This installation token is associated with this test migration to project we've created. So it's used across whichever kind of machines you're going to be migrating as part of this project, but we don't need to worry too much about that. That's more for kind of API settings and whatnot. What we need to focus on is just using these commands here. So let's copy that, and I'm going to jump across to my server terminal. So that is the server 2 that we're on, 36.226. And then I'm just going to paste that. There we go. It's copied that installation file. Let's just go across to copy the installation command and go back to our terminal, paste. And this is going to install the agent. It's going to recognize what needs to be replicated. It's going to connect this server to this console. And in a little bit, what we should see is that we should see, once this has completed its activity, we'll see the server appear in this window over here. To save some time, what I've already done in my other project is I have already completed this step with server 1. So you can see we're doing it for server 2 at the moment. I already completed the step for server 1. So let me jump across to that project and you'll see what it looks like. So this is our dashboard for server 1. There, that's the server ending in .95. The reason it says, you'd have noticed on this dashboard, it said requires attention, is because it's basically alerting us that this machine hasn't yet been tested. What I do need to show you first before we complete that testing process is that once your server's been added to this machine's view, we can see it's being kept in sync with continuous data replication. So that's block level replication that's taking place. What we would then need to do is define the blueprint for this machine. The blueprint is basically how we deploy the target machine. So I'll show you that now quickly. When we select that machine and click on it, it'll take us to this screen. You'll notice that there's a source, and that shows pretty much everything that we need to know about this machine, the disks that are installed. It tells you what packages are installed. So you get quite a bit of information out of that. But if we click on Blueprint, you can see here the form, use this form to edit the properties of the target machines. So there's a few things that are important here to consider. Firstly, I won't go into too much detail, but you can either kind of mandate a specific instance type, or you can let it copy the source, so it'll identify, CPU and RAM, and then replicate that. In terms of launch type, there's a few different options there, but where it gets a bit more important is how you plan to deploy these machines in your target environment. So you can leave these on default. By leaving it on default, we can see what it'll do. It'll create a new subnet for us. It'll create a new security group for us, which is by default open to 84.43.22 and 3389. And there's a bunch of kind of settings around IP addressing. Just to kind of show you how this plays out, I've already created a target VPC and subnet. So I'm going to choose this 10 range. Security group, I'm going to use an existing security group that I authored. Copy source IP, no, let's have a new IP. And then elastic IP, yeah, let's have a new elastic IP. I'll leave the rest the same. You could also provide the target instance, the server that CloudEndure will spin up for you. You can provide it with its own IAM role if you need to. But for now, I've just made those couple of setting changes. So I'm going to click Save Blueprint. Cool. So what we can do now is we can actually launch a test mode server. Test and cutover, it does, CloudEndure basically does the same thing. It's the distinction between these two are more for kind of labeling and managing your projects, so that you can run a test today, for example, and then perhaps in a couple of days' time, you actually do the true cutover. And so that will then show that this machine has gone through a testing process and is ready for cutover. So it's more to kind of categorize the state that that the servers are in. I'm just going to launch it in test mode. So it's telling us we're about to launch one new machine. Click OK. And if we click on job progress, we'll start seeing it do things. So while it's doing this and spinning up a copy of that server, let's switch back to the other project where we added the machine and see where we are. Right, so what we can see for this machine, and in fact, if we switch across to the terminal window, we can see that the CloudEndure agent finished downloading, installing, and it completed that all successfully. And what it's doing now is it's starting a data replication process. So this will take a few minutes to get the server in sync with CloudEndure, and that would, then give us the opportunity to, launch a test or do a cutover, like we were doing with our other server. So let's jump across to our other server and see where we are with it. Cool, so it's in progress. So we'll give it a few minutes. And let's see in a little bit where we stand with it. While that's happening, I'll show you a few things in our other dashboard. We can see that this machine is busy with its replication, so that's great. A couple of things that, sorry, let me go back. A couple of things that you can just bear in mind for CloudEndure is under machine actions. There is an option to pause data replication. So if we paused it right now, it would stop at this 11% and it would pick up, if we resumed it later on from that 11% or 20% now. If, however, we clicked on stop, that whatever replication had, kind of been completed to date, that would have been lost. It would have completely stopped that replication, and we'd have needed to start it again from scratch if we so wished. You can also move machines between projects, so we could move this machine into our other project. I won't do that just yet. And then the other thing that is also useful, especially if you've got lots of machines here, is you can filter. So anything that's here, you can kind of filter by, 172-31 would pick it up. It uses a variety of kind of criteria in terms of identifying the server. You could also search for the ID, it would show up. So that can be quite useful. Another thing to just touch on is that these statuses. So what you may have seen, I won't switch back to it right now, but if the machine's in replication, currently in replication, but hasn't been tested, you'd have seen a yellow flag there, basically saying, listen, this machine hasn't been tested. It is also for other warnings. Once you test it though, a couple of things happen. That yellow disappears, and you'll see a little green appear, a little green line appear on the left here, showing that it's basically ready for launching, that you've tested it and you can launch it. And so in that case, this will also be lit as a little purple spaceship icon. And then it, pretty evident that would be lit once that machine has been launched. There are a number of other features in CloudEndure. So what you can also do is you can create, basically you can create migration waves. And so what you'd use that for is perhaps you've got, I don't know, let's say 20 servers, and 5 of them are pretty closely linked. So 1 or 2 might be database servers that service the other 3. So you wouldn't necessarily want to move them, you'd want to move them in one group, for example. So what you could do is, if you've got 20 servers, you could create a wave 1 to move all 5 of those together, and then a wave 2, an hour or 2 later to move another 2 or 3 machines, and a kind of a wave 3 to move, the final machines an hour or 2 later after you finish testing. So you can stagger it and kind of orchestrate it to some extent like that. But let's just jump back to our test machine, and let's just see where we are with this job progress. Okay, so it's busy still creating the replica for that. As it creates that replica, you will see that it provides us with details of that replicated server under this target tab. I'll just give it a moment or two to refresh there. One other thing I can show you under the setup, we have covered the AWS credentials. I showed you how that worked. We covered the replication settings. You can also alter these for additional servers, so these don't need to kind of exist at a global level. Licenses, you'll get a bunch of licenses as part of signing up, and you can see I'm only using 1 on this project, but it does tell us here, which machine we're using for this project and when that license expiry is expected. And then the other thing is that under other settings, you can also configure notifications around the project. So yeah, there's a fair bit to there's a fair bit to look at there. You can also, under manage users on the top right, you can also add additional users. So if you've got a few people coordinating your migration, you can add additional users, and you can specify their roles. You might have noticed there's also SAML settings that you can use there, so you don't have to manage specific usernames and passwords yourself there. Let's jump back to our job status. Started creating a new Elastic IP, and we're done. So if we look at the target settings here, there's the public IP for our new target. And what we're expecting is that the machine that was on this IP 95, it's going to pop up when I paste it into the browser. It's going to pop up with the same server and original IP. It's going to say that, but then this is going to be a new IP in the 10 range. So let's paste this in here. There we go. So server 1 has been part of a successful test and has been launched into my Cape Town region in a new subnet and VPC in the 10 range. And yeah, it's using the settings that I gave it, and I can I can access it. So if I go back to CloudEndure, like I mentioned, it now shows a green bar that this has been successfully tested. It's ready for an actual cutover launch if we want, and the target has been launched, and it's saying basically tested 2 minutes ago. Is there anything else I want to share here? I guess before we close off, I can just jump across to our other server and see where we are.
Cool. So just a few more minutes of lag for it to catch up on. The initial synchronization is almost complete. We're sitting at around 80%. As you can see, it's expecting it to complete in 4 more minutes. And that is our demo. If we go back to the dashboard, we can see that initial sync is finishing off. And once it completes that initial sync, it will show up as ready. So that's it for the demo. I hope you enjoyed that. And I guess the takeaway is that CloudEndure really is super easy to use. And so, yeah, definitely consider it for any migrations you need to undertake to AWS in the future. And so to close off, and I know we've covered a lot, a few key points. First, it's very important to understand your technology landscape and be selective around which applications and workloads you want to retire, migrate, or transform and modernize. Second, AWS has invested a lot to support you, our customers, and ensure that you have low risk and successful migrations. Please consider not only the tools I've covered today, but also the other supporting tools and frameworks on offer for the assess and mobilize phases we've covered, including those available from our partners. We really want you to have the broadest choice, so that you can use the most appropriate thing for your requirements and use case. And then lastly, never feel that you should be struggling through any of this in a lonely manner. Not only do we at AWS offer you a lot of support, but there are also over 100 trusted and certified AWS migration partners you could also leverage for additional assistance. And so that is all. I hope you learned something today. And thank you so much for your time. Goodbye.